The rider figured he was safe. Out here, on a lonely stretch of frontier carved between red canyon walls and dying sunlight, danger was supposed to be close enough to see. A knife in an alley, a revolver across a saloon table, maybe a gang waiting behind the next ridge. But distance felt like protection in the Old West. If trouble was coming, surely you'd hear the horses first. He adjusted the reins and kept moving through the orange haze of dusk, boots creaking against the stirrups while the canyon swallowed every sound except the wind. Then came the crack, not thunder. Not an echo, a rifle shot. Oh, the rider jerked sideways instantly, collapsing from the saddle before his horse even understood what had happened. Somewhere far above the canyon floor, hidden among rocks and shadows, a shooter calmly worked the lever of a rifle from hundreds of yards away. And that was the terrifying truth about the real Wild West. Hollywood taught us to fear fast hands and high-noon duels, but the deadliest men on the frontier rarely stood in the middle of town announcing themselves. They waited on ridgelines, inside tree cover, across open valleys where most people believed they were untouchable. Scouts used long rifles to track enemies before they were ever seen. Lawmen relied on distance shooting to stop outlaws escaping across plains. Native warriors mastered terrain and range with terrifying efficiency. Bounty hunters learned quickly that patience could kill faster than courage. Because once accurate long-range rifles arrived on the frontier, power changed forever. One skilled marksman could lock down an entire canyon crossing, dominate a hunting trail, or pin down dozens of armed men without ever revealing his exact position. Suddenly, survival no longer depended on who drew first. It depended on who saw the other man from farther away. And that raises a chilling question. And how far away can death really come from? On the American frontier, the answer became farther than anyone imagined. The Wild West didn't create sharpshooters by accident. It forged them out of necessity. Out on the frontier, a missed shot could mean starvation, ambush, or death long before help ever arrived. A buffalo hunter perched on a windy ridge might only get one clean opportunity before an entire herd thundered away for miles. A cavalry scout crossing hostile territory couldn't afford to waste ammunition on guesswork. Even wagon trains moving west learned quickly that survival depended less on fast shooting and more on accurate shooting. Every bullet carried across the frontier had weight, cost, and consequence. That brutal reality shaped an entirely new kind of marksman. Long before the word sniper became common military language, frontier shooters were already mastering distance, wind, elevation, and patience through pure experience. Hunters spent years learning how a crosswind could drift a bullet across open plains. Scouts memorized canyon echoes and rock formations that could conceal enemies hundreds of yards away. Native warriors used cliffs, ravines, and natural cover with astonishing tactical skill, turning the vast landscape itself into a weapon. And the American West was the perfect proving ground for deadly long-range shooting. Endless deserts, rolling grasslands, and towering canyons created sightlines unlike anything seen in the crowded cities of the East. Suddenly, battles weren't fought across streets or fences. They unfolded across entire valleys. At the same time, firearm technology was evolving at terrifying speed. The slow muzzleloaders of earlier decades gave way to metallic cartridge rifles that loaded faster, fired farther, and hit harder with remarkable consistency. Hunters demanded more range. Soldiers demanded more stopping power. Frontiersmen demanded rifles they could trust with their lives. Oh, but which rifles truly changed the game? That answer begins with the weapons that turned ordinary men into legends from distances once thought impossible. Before we pull the trigger on today's story, if you're a fan of vintage steel and frontier grit, make sure you're subscribed. Now, let's head into the smoke. At first glance, the Springfield Model 1873 didn't look revolutionary. It was long, heavy, and fired only one round at a time. In an age when repeating rifles were beginning to dominate headlines, many men saw it as outdated before it even proved itself. But the frontier had a way of rewarding power over speed. After the Civil War, the U.S. Army adopted the Springfield trapdoor rifle as its standard service weapon, chambered in the massive .45-70 government cartridge. And when that round exploded from the barrel, it carried enough force to drop horses, smash through cover, and reach distances that terrified anyone caught in open country. Soldiers stationed across the plains quickly learned what that kind of range meant. During the Indian Wars, cavalry scouts and frontier marksmen often fought enemies who knew the terrain far better than they did. A single accurate shot from a Springfield could stop a mounted charge long before revolvers were even useful. In rocky canyons and endless grasslands, distance became survival. The rifle's famous trapdoor breech-loading system was simple but dependable. Flip the metal breech open, insert the cartridge, snap it shut, and fire. That simplicity mattered on dusty campaigns where sand, mud, and weather destroyed more complicated weapons. And when the trigger broke, the result was unforgettable. Thick black powder smoke bursting into the air, recoil hammering into the shoulder, and a deafening boom rolling across the plains like thunder. Of course, the Springfield had weaknesses. Against repeating rifles, its slow firing speed could become deadly in close combat. A skilled shooter had to stay calm, disciplined, and accurate under pressure. But on the frontier, one carefully aimed bullet often mattered more than 10 rushed ones. And that raises an important question. Could a single-shot rifle really hold its own against weapons capable of firing again and again without stopping? For some frontiersmen, the answer came in the form of a rifle that changed rapid-fire combat forever. If there was one rifle that truly made men fear distance on the frontier, it was the Sharps. This wasn't a weapon built for flashy gunfights or desperate saloon brawls. The Sharps rifle was designed for patience, for calculation, for the kind of cold precision that could end a fight before the target even knew danger existed. Buffalo hunters proved that better than anyone. Across the Great Plains, professional hunters would crawl into tall grass before sunrise, sometimes lying motionless for hours, with a heavy Sharps rifle resting across cross sticks. Far in the distance stood enormous buffalo herds, dark shapes drifting through the morning haze. One careful breath, one squeeze of the trigger. Then came the deep roar of black powder and the sight of a massive animal collapsing hundreds of yards away. The Sharps became infamous because it could do what many rifles of its era simply could not. Its massive cartridges and heavy caliber rounds delivered crushing power at extraordinary range. Skilled shooters learned to read wind, elevation, and even mirage effects rising from hot plains. Some frontier marksmen reportedly made shots so distant that witnesses barely believed them possible. And it wasn't just hunters relying on Sharps rifles. Scouts, plainsmen, and hardened frontier veterans carried them into dangerous territory where range meant survival. During conflicts across the plains, native warriors quickly learned to respect the rifle's reach. Sometimes the shot arrived long before the sound did, leaving confusion and panic spreading through mounted groups that couldn't even locate the shooter. That psychological effect made the Sharps terrifying. A man armed with one could dominate open country from astonishing distances, turning hillsides and grasslands into deadly sniper positions decades before modern sniper doctrine even existed. Because in the Wild West, the deadliest weapon wasn't always the fastest. Sometimes, it was simply the one that could reach you first. The Sharps rifle may have ruled the world of extreme distance, but the Winchester Model 1873 changed something even bigger. It changed the pace of frontier combat itself. Before repeating rifles became common, many gunfights were brutally simple. Fire once, reload frantically, and pray your opponent missed first. But the Winchester altered that equation forever. With its smooth lever-action system and tubular magazine packed with metallic cartridges, a shooter could fire again and again without lowering the rifle from his shoulder. On the frontier, that kind of speed felt almost unstoppable. There's a reason people eventually called it the gun that won the West. The Winchester wasn't the most powerful rifle on the plains, nor the longest range weapon available. But what made it legendary was balance. It delivered respectable accuracy, rapid follow-up shots, and rugged reliability in one compact package. Ranchers carried it while driving cattle through dangerous territory. Settlers kept it beside wagon seats crossing isolated trails. Lawmen trusted it during standoffs where a single-shot rifle simply couldn't keep up. And outlaws loved it for exactly the same reasons. Imagine a group of bandits charging toward a ranch house, expecting frightened settlers armed with old muzzleloaders. Instead, the defenders begin cycling Winchester rifles with terrifying speed, brass casings flying while accurate rounds slam into fences, horses, and cover positions, before the attackers can even close the distance. More than one overconfident outlaw learned that lesson the hard way. What truly made the Winchester dangerous was tactical flexibility. A skilled marksman could still land accurate shots from impressive distances, but unlike heavier single-shot rifles, he could instantly fire again if the first bullet failed to finish the fight. In ambushes, defensive battles, or fast-moving frontier skirmishes, that advantage became enormous, because once repeating rifles arrived in the West, surviving no longer depended only on precision. Now it also depended on who could keep firing when everyone else was forced to reload. The first time many frontier fighters encountered a Spencer repeating rifle, they thought they were facing multiple shooters. They weren't. That was the terrifying power of sustained fire in an era still dominated by single-shot weapons. Originally introduced during the Civil War, the Spencer repeating rifle carried its influence directly into the Wild West, where mobility and firepower often meant survival. At a glance, it looked modest compared to some of the massive frontier rifles that came later. But hidden inside its design was a mechanical advantage that changed combat forever: a 7-round tubular magazine loaded into the buttstock. 7 shots without stopping to reload sounded almost unbelievable to men accustomed to pouring powder, seeding bullets, and carefully preparing every single round by hand. Suddenly, cavalry scouts and mounted fighters could unleash rapid, continuous fire while maneuvering across open terrain. In horseback engagements, that advantage became chaos for anyone caught on the receiving end. Imagine riding across a dry plain believing an enemy position held only one defender. Then, from behind scattered rocks or brush cover, shots begin arriving one after another, with barely a pause between them. Dust erupts around horses, riders panic. Men scatter, convinced they've ridden into an ambush involving an entire squad. But often it was only one Spencer rifleman working the action with practiced speed. Native warriors and frontier fighters adapted quickly once repeating rifles appeared. Old tactics designed around slow reload times suddenly became dangerous. Charging a position armed with repeaters could turn deadly in seconds. Defensive stands became stronger. Ambushes became more confusing and psychologically devastating. And perhaps most importantly, older single-shot rifles began looking obsolete almost overnight. The Spencer didn't just introduce more ammunition capacity. It introduced a completely new rhythm of warfare on the frontier, paving the way for the lever-action rifles that would soon dominate the American West with even greater speed and reliability. By the time the Winchester Model 1894 arrived, the Wild West was already beginning to fade. The great buffalo herds were disappearing. Frontier towns were becoming cities. Railroads cut through territories that once felt unreachable. But in many ways, the 1894 Winchester represented the final and ultimate evolution of everything the frontier had demanded from a rifle for decades. And when men first fired it, they immediately understood the future had arrived. The biggest leap came from smokeless powder technology. Older black powder rifles filled the air with thick clouds of smoke after every shot, obscuring vision and revealing a shooter's position almost instantly. The Winchester 1894 changed that completely. Its faster, cleaner-burning cartridges produced greater velocity, flatter trajectories, and dramatically improved accuracy at distance. Oh, for the first time, skilled marksmen could play shots farther away with consistency that earlier frontier rifles struggled to achieve. Chambered in the legendary .30-030 cartridge, the rifle quickly earned a reputation as one of the deadliest and most practical hunting weapons America had ever seen. Lightweight, reliable, and manageable to shoot, it became trusted by ranchers defending remote property, lawmen tracking fugitives through rough country, and hunters stalking deer through mountain forests where one clean shot meant everything. Picture a lone tracker high in the Rockies at dawn. Frost hangs in the air while a buck steps cautiously between distant trees. The shooter raises a Winchester 1894, steady and calm. No massive smoke cloud, no crushing recoil. Just a sharp crack echoing through the mountains before the animal collapses hundreds of feet away. That moment captured the entire journey of frontier firearms evolution. The Springfield delivered raw stopping power. The Sharps mastered terrifying distance. The Spencer introduced sustained fire. Earlier Winchesters balanced speed with reliability. But the Model 1894 merged all those lessons into one weapon system that felt modern, efficient, and brutally effective. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. The rifle that perfected the Wild West arrived just as the Wild West itself was disappearing forever. A rifle could be powerful. It could be innovative. It could even change the balance of an entire battlefield. But on the frontier, none of that mattered in the hands of a careless shooter. The real danger came from the men behind the trigger. These weren't flashy gamblers spinning revolvers beneath saloon lights. Most frontier sharpshooters lived quiet, brutal lives shaped by distance, patience, and survival. Buffalo hunters spent years studying wind patterns sweeping across open plains. Scouts learned how heat shimmer could distort a target at long range. Some marksmen could estimate distance almost instinctively, reading terrain the way sailors read the sea, and when they fired, they usually fired once. That single shot was often enough. Imagine a frontier scout lying motionless along a rocky ridge, while mounted riders move through the valley below, completely unaware they're being watched. The shooter controls his breathing, waits for the exact moment, then squeezes the trigger with calm precision. A distant figure drops from the saddle, panic spreads through the group, and before anyone can locate the source of the shot, the marksman has already disappeared back into the landscape. That mystery became part of their legend. Unlike Hollywood gunslingers craving attention, many real frontier sharpshooters avoided close combat whenever possible. Distance was safety, concealment was survival. The deadliest men in the West often became feared precisely because so few people ever saw them clearly. Stories spread through camps, forts, and frontier towns about impossible shots, invisible riflemen, and hunters who could strike targets from distances that sounded almost supernatural. Oh? And maybe that's why these figures still haunt the mythology of the Old West today. Because deep down, people understood something terrifying about frontier marksmanship. The most dangerous man wasn't always the fastest draw in town. Sometimes, he was the man you never saw at all. The Wild West was built on distance between forts, between towns, between help and survival. And in that enormous, unforgiving landscape, the men who controlled distance controlled everything else. That's why these rifles mattered so much. The frontier wasn't truly ruled by revolvers spinning beneath saloon chandeliers. It was ruled by powerful rifles resting across canyon ridges, hidden inside tall grass, or braced against saddle leather under open skies. Long before enemies could close the gap, battles were already being decided by men who understood patience, accuracy, and range better than anyone around them. And over time, those weapons evolved with terrifying speed. Heavy single-shot rifles like the Springfield and Sharps delivered crushing power capable of dominating open terrain from incredible distances. Then came repeating rifles like the Spencer and Winchester, transforming combat into something faster, more chaotic, and far more deadly. Finally, smokeless powder and modern cartridges pushed frontier firearms into an entirely new era where speed, accuracy, and reliability merged together in ways earlier generations could barely imagine. But perhaps the most important transformational, it was psychological. Because once accurate long-range rifles spread across the American frontier, no place truly felt safe anymore. A rocky hillside, a distant ridgeline, a patch of silent grassland. Any of it could hide someone watching patiently through drifting heat and dust. Then came the shot, one sharp crack rolling across empty plains, followed by silence heavy enough to stop men in their tracks. That silence became part of the mythology of the West itself, a world where survival belonged not only to the strongest or fastest, but to the shooter who could strike first from farther away than anyone thought possible. In a land ruled by distance, dust, and survival, was the fastest gun really the deadliest, or was it the man nobody ever saw? The West is full of legends, and we're documenting every single one. Join the ranks by hitting that subscribe button and smash the like if you enjoyed this ride. Thanks for riding along. See you on the next trail.